The Grand Thompson mansion buzzed with activity as servants rushed to prepare for what everyone called the wedding of the year. Catherine, the head maid, barked orders at the staff, while decorators transformed the garden into a sea of white roses and silk ribbons. Tomorrow, billionaire Ethan Thompson would marry socialite Olivia Rothschild, and everything had to be perfect. In his study, Ethan stared at his computer screen, ignoring the chaos outside. At 32, he had built Thompson Technologies into one of the country's largest companies. His dark hair showed hints of grey at the temples, giving him what magazines called a distinguished look. But today something felt off. "Brother, you should be getting ready for your bachelor party." Alexander Thompson walked in without knocking, as usual. At 35, he was the spitting image of their late father, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same calculating look in his eyes. "Just finishing some work," Ethan said, closing his laptop. Alexander dropped into a leather chair. "Always the responsible one. That's why Dad left you in charge." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Speaking of which, have you signed those papers giving me more control of the Asian division?" "Not yet, after the honeymoon." "Of course," Alexander stood up. "Well, don't be late. Olivia's planned quite the party at the country club." Ethan watched his brother leave. Their relationship had grown strained ever since their father's death 2 years ago. Alexander never forgave him for being chosen as CEO. The party was exactly what you'd expect from Olivia: expensive, excessive, and carefully staged for maximum social media impact. She sat beside Ethan, her blonde hair perfectly styled, diamond earrings catching the light as she posed for yet another photo. "Darling, smile," she whispered through her teeth. "People magazine is here." Ethan forced a smile, wondering when their relationship had become more about appearances than love. They'd met at a charity gala 3 years ago. She was beautiful, smart, and came from the right family. It made sense on paper. The next morning, Ethan woke up early. His head pounded from too much champagne, but something else bothered him. A nagging feeling that he was making a mistake. He needed to clear his head. He grabbed the keys to his Ferrari and headed out, ignoring calls from his best man, Jake. The coastal road was empty this early. As he rounded a curve, a dog darted into the road. Ethan swerved, but it was too late. The car spun out of control. The world went black. Sarah Miller was halfway through her night shift at St. Luke's Hospital when they brought him in. As a cleaning lady, she wasn't supposed to get involved with patients, but something about the unconscious man caught her attention. Maybe it was how alone he looked, despite all the expensive clothes and the crowd of reporters outside. "Poor guy," Nancy, one of the nurses, said, "was supposed to get married today." Sarah watched as doctors rushed around him. She'd seen plenty of rich patients come through, but something felt different about this one. Hours later, after the press had gone and the hospital quieted down, Sarah cleaned his room. She noticed there were no flowers, no cards, just beeping machines and silence. "You know," she said softly while wiping down a table, "you picked quite a day to end up here." The machines beeped steadily in response. That night, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about him. She'd seen the news: Ethan Thompson, billionaire CEO, tragic accident on his wedding day. But the man in that hospital bed didn't look like a billionaire. He looked lost. The next few days brought a parade of visitors. Olivia appeared with a photographer in tow, crying perfectly orchestrated tears that never smudged her makeup. Alexander Thompson arrived with lawyers, speaking in hushed tones about power of attorney. Sarah watched it all while going about her duties. "They're like vultures," she muttered one night while mopping the floor in Ethan's room. "All circling, waiting to pick you clean." She didn't know then that her words would prove prophetic, or that she would become the only person standing between Ethan Thompson and complete ruin. In his coma, Ethan floated in darkness. Sometimes he heard voices, his brother discussing business deals, Olivia complaining about postponing the wedding, doctors updating his condition. But one voice stood out, soft, kind, talking to him about simple things like the weather or what book she was reading. He didn't know her name yet, but something in that voice made him want to wake up. Meanwhile, Alexander wasted no time. Within days, He called an emergency board meeting at Thompson Technologies. With Ethan's old power of attorney in hand, he began making changes. Board members who opposed him suddenly found reasons to resign. Long-time employees were replaced with Alexander's people. "It's temporary," he assured shareholders, "until my brother recovers." But in private meetings with Michael Davis, their biggest competitor, Alexander's true plans emerged. He was systematically dismantling everything Ethan had built, piece by piece. Sarah saw the news reports during her breaks. Thompson Technologies' stock was falling. Rumors spread about mismanagement and possible fraud. She told Ethan about it during her nightly cleaning rounds, keeping him updated on the outside world. "Your brother was here again today," she said while dusting. "3 lawyers with him this time. I don't trust him, Mr. Thompson. Something's not right." In the darkness of his mind, Ethan heard her. He wanted to respond, to thank her for being the only one who seemed to care about him rather than his money. But he remained trapped in his own body, unable to move or speak. A month passed. Olivia's visits became shorter and less frequent. She always arrived when photographers were present, playing the part of the devoted fiancé. But Sarah noticed she never touched Ethan, never stayed more than a few minutes once the cameras left. One night, Sarah overheard Olivia arguing with Alexander in the hallway. "How much longer?" Olivia hissed. "I can't keep this act up forever." "Just a few more weeks," Alexander replied. "Once the merger with Davis is complete, it won't matter if he wakes up. There'll be nothing left for him to control." Sarah's hands shook as she pushed her cleaning cart past them. They didn't even notice her. She was invisible to people like them, but she had heard enough to know that Ethan Thompson's enemies weren't just circling anymore. They were closing in for the kill. Sarah couldn't sleep that night after overhearing Alexander and Olivia's conversation. She tossed and turned in her small apartment, thinking about the unconscious man in room 507. The next morning, she arrived at work early, determined to do something. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she said, entering his room with her cleaning cart. "I need to tell you what I heard last night. I know you might not hear me, but I have to try." She told him everything while changing his sheets and cleaning the room. About Alexander's plans, about Olivia's impatience, about the merger that would destroy his company. "I wish you could wake up and stop them," she sighed, adjusting his pillow. "But until then, I'll be your eyes and ears." That same morning, Alexander. Thompson sat in his brother's office, now his office, at Thompson Technologies. The view of the city skyline pleased him. This was what he deserved, what should have been his all along. Michael Davis, their biggest competitor, walked in without knocking. He was older than Alexander, with silver hair and expensive suits that screamed old money. "The board is getting nervous," Davis said, helping himself to a drink. "Your brother's been in a coma for 6 weeks. People are asking questions." Alexander loosened his tie. "Let them ask. I have power of attorney. Everything's legal." "Legal doesn't mean smart." Davis swirled his drink. "What if he wakes up?" "He won't. And if he does, it'll be too late. The merger will be complete, and Thompson Technologies will be just another division of Davis Industries." They didn't notice Nancy, one of the nurses, walking past the open door. She had come to deliver Ethan's medical records that Alexander had requested. She heard everything. Back at the hospital, Nancy found Sarah cleaning the third-floor bathrooms. "You need to hear this," Nancy said, pulling Sarah aside. She repeated everything she'd overheard at Thompson Technologies. Sarah's hands gripped her mop tighter. "We have to do something." "Like what? We're just hospital staff. Who's going to listen to us?" Sarah thought for a moment. There must be someone who cared about him before all this. Someone who isn't after his money. That night, Sarah went through old newspapers in the hospital's waiting room. She read everything she could find about Ethan Thompson. One name kept appearing in older articles: Jake Morrison, his best friend since college and the company's head of security. Jake hadn't visited since the first week. According to the gossip magazines, Alexander had fired him from Thompson Technologies right after taking control. Sarah found Jake's auto repair shop address online. The next morning, before her shift, she drove across town to find him. The shop was small but clean. Jake Morrison looked nothing like the man in the newspaper photos wearing expensive suits. Now he wore overalls and had grease on his hands. "Mr. Morrison?" Sarah approached him. "I need to talk to you about Ethan Thompson." Jake wiped his hands on a rag. "Who are you?" "I'm Sarah Miller. I clean his room at St. Luke's and I think his brother is stealing his company." Jake's expression darkened. "I know. That's why Alexander fired me. I was asking too many questions." They sat in Jake's small office, and Sarah told him everything. The overheard conversations, the merger plans, Olivia's true colors. "I tried to warn Ethan about her," Jake said, shaking his head. "She started dating him right when the company's value tripled. Too convenient. Will you help me stop them?" Jake leaned back in his chair. "It won't be easy. Alexander's smart. He's gotten rid of everyone loyal to Ethan. But you know where to start?" "Maybe." Jake pulled out his phone. "I still have friends in the company. People Alexander doesn't know about. Give me a few days." Meanwhile, at Thompson Technologies, Alexander met with the board of directors. He stood at the head of the long table, confidence oozing from every pore. "The merger with Davis Industries is a golden opportunity," he announced. "Our shareholders will receive premium value for their stocks." "And your brother?" one board member asked. "What happens to his shares?" Alexander smiled smoothly. "As his legal guardian, I'll make sure his interests are protected." In the back of the room, Alexander's assistant, Maria, took notes. She'd worked for Ethan for 5 years before Alexander demoted her. She saw how he was systematically destroying everything his brother had built. That night, she made copies of documents she wasn't supposed to see. Papers that proved Alexander was selling company assets at below-market prices to Davis Industries through shell corporations. Maria knew she could lose her job, or worse, if anyone discovered what she was doing. But she remembered how Ethan had helped pay for her daughter's college. She owed him this. At the hospital, Sarah continued her routine. During the day, she cleaned rooms and kept her eyes and ears open. At night, she sat with Ethan, reading to him from books she borrowed from the library. "I met your friend Jake today," she told him while reading The Count of Monte Cristo. "He's going to help us. You just need to wake up, Mr. Thompson. We'll have proof of what they're doing. But we need you." She thought she saw his fingers twitch, but she'd seen that before. False hope was worse than no hope at all. Olivia made one of her rare visits the next day, bringing a TV crew with her. She wore a black designer dress, playing the part of the grieving fiancé perfectly. "It's been so hard," she told the reporter, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "But love means standing by someone in sickness and in health." Sarah watched from the doorway, fighting the urge to throw her mop at Olivia's perfectly made-up face. After the cameras left, Olivia's phone rang. Sarah pretended to clean nearby, listening. "Yes, Alexander, the interview went well. No change in his condition. Of course, I'll keep visiting until the merger is complete. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." For that night, Sarah sat beside Ethan's bed, anger making her hands shake. "Your brother and your fiancé. They think they've won. They think you're never going to wake up." She took his hand, something she'd never done before. "But they don't know you like I do. I've been here every night. I've talked to you, read to you. I know you're fighting to come back." In the darkness of his coma, Ethan felt the warmth of her hand. He heard her words, as he'd heard everything she'd said over the past weeks. He tried to squeeze her hand to give her a sign, and this time his fingers moved. Sarah froze. "Mr. Thompson." His hand definitely squeezed hers. Weak, barely there, but real. She jumped up and ran to the nurse's station. "Nancy, come quick. He's responding." When they returned to the room, Ethan was still again, but Sarah knew what she'd felt. He was in there, fighting to return. "Keep it quiet," Nancy warned. "If his brother finds out he's showing signs of waking up..." Sarah nodded. She understood. Alexander and his allies thought they had all the time in the world to dismantle Ethan's life. They needed to be wrong. The morning sun peeked through the hospital windows as Sarah finished her night shift. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan, squeezing her hand. It gave her hope, but it also scared her. If Alexander found out his brother was showing signs of waking up, there was no telling what he might do. Jake Morrison pulled up to the hospital in his old pickup truck. They had agreed to meet before Sarah went home. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept. "I've got something," he said, pulling papers from his jacket. "Maria, Ethan's old assistant has been collecting evidence. Look at this. Sarah's eyes widened. As she read, the documents showed how Alexander had been selling off pieces of Thompson Technologies to Davis Industries through fake companies. This is good, right? She asked. We can stop them. Jake shook his head. Not yet, we need more, and we need Ethan awake. Without him, we're just employees making accusations against the man with power of attorney. Inside the hospital, Nancy was checking Ethan's vital signs when Olivia walked in, followed by her usual photographer. Oh, how is he today? Olivia asked, not really looking at Ethan as she fixed her hair. The same, Nancy replied coldly. She'd grown to dislike these fake visits. Olivia posed beside the bed, holding Ethan's hand for the camera. My darling, I miss you so much, the photographer snapped away. As soon as he finished, Olivia dropped Ethan's hand and checked her phone. I have a lunch meeting, she announced. The charity committee simply can't function without me. After she left, Nancy muttered under her breath. The charity committee? More like the jewelry store. Everyone knows she's dating that tennis instructor. Word spread fast among hospital staff. 2 nurses had seen Olivia at expensive restaurants with a young, athletic man. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. That afternoon, Alexander arrived with more lawyers. Sarah watched from the hallway as they spread papers across the room's small table. Here are the transfer documents, one lawyer said. Once you sign these, the Asia division will be completely under Davis Industries' control. Alexander smiled. Excellent. The shareholders won't know what hit them until it's too late. Sarah's hands shook as she pushed her cleaning cart past the room. She had to tell Jake about this, but when she turned the corner, she ran straight into Michael Davis. Watch where you're going, he snapped, straightening his expensive suit. Sorry, sir? Sarah kept her head down, playing the part of the invisible cleaning lady. Davis walked into Ethan's room. Is it done? Almost, Alexander replied. By the end of the week, the Asia division will be yours. Then we move on to Europe. Good. The sooner we dismantle this company, the better. Sarah waited until they left before pulling out her phone to text Jake. But before she could, she noticed something. Ethan's heart monitor showed increased activity. He had heard everything. That night, after her shift started, Sarah went straight to his room. I know you heard them, she said softly, taking his hand. I know you're in there fighting. We're fighting too. Jake and Maria are gathering evidence. We just need more time. To her surprise, a tear rolled down Ethan's cheek. She quickly wiped it away. Don't give up, she whispered. I won't let them win. At Thompson Technologies, Maria stayed late, copying more documents. She had access to Alexander's email because she still managed the office systems. What she found made her blood run cold. Alexander had been emailing with a doctor at a private clinic. They discussed transferring Ethan there, away from St. Luke's, away from people who cared about him. She immediately called. Jake! Jake was under a car when his phone rang. After hearing Maria's news, he cursed and grabbed his keys. He found Sarah at the hospital just as she started her shift. They're planning to move him, he said, showing her the emails Maria had forwarded. Some private clinic owned by one of Davis's friends. Sarah felt sick. When? Next week. They're just waiting for the paperwork. We can't let that happen. That clinic. They could do anything to him there. Jake ran his hands through his hair. I know, but what can we do? Alexander has legal authority. Sarah thought for a moment. Maybe we don't have to stop it legally. Maybe we just need to stall them until Ethan wakes up. How? The hospital has procedures, protocols. If a patient shows certain symptoms, they can't be moved. Jake caught on. Nancy, she's on our side. She could help. They found Nancy at the nurse's station. After hearing their plan, she nodded slowly. It's risky, she said, but I can document some concerns that would make transport dangerous. Blood pressure irregularities, possible infection risks. It won't stop them forever, but it could buy us a few weeks. While they talked, Sarah kept thinking about the tear she'd seen on Ethan's cheek. He was aware, fighting to wake up. They just had to give him time. Late that night, Sarah sat in his room as usual, reading from The Count of Monte Cristo. She'd chosen it because it was about a man betrayed by those he trusted, who came back to reclaim what was his. Edmond Dante didn't give up, she told Ethan, and neither will we. She felt his hand twitch in hers. His fingers moved, trying to form words. Sarah's heart raced. Are you trying to tell me something? Squeeze once for yes. A weak squeeze. Oh my God. She fought to keep her voice steady. Okay, stay calm. We're going to figure this out. She ran to get Nancy. When they returned, Ethan was moving his fingers again. Nancy checked his vital signs. This is definitely new activity, but Sarah, we have to be careful who knows about this. If Alexander finds out. I know. Sarah looked at Ethan. We'll protect you. Just keep fighting. Outside the hospital, a car sat in the shadows. Inside, a private investigator hired by Alexander watched the building. He'd been following Sarah, noting her meetings with Jake, her late-night visits to Ethan's room. He picked up his phone. Mr. Thompson, that cleaning lady you asked about? She's definitely up to something. And she's not alone. Alexander hung up the phone and stared out his office window. He'd worked too hard, come too far to let some cleaning lady ruin everything. Time to make some changes at St. Luke's, he muttered, reaching for his phone again. This time, he called the hospital administrator. The pieces were set. The next day, Sarah Miller would learn what happened to people who got in Alexander Thompson's way. Sarah arrived for her shift the next evening to find the hospital administrator waiting for her. Mrs. Henderson was a thin woman with glasses who rarely left her office, let alone spoke to cleaning staff. Miss Miller, please come with me. In the administrator's office, Sarah's heart sank as she heard the words, "We're transferring you to the downtown facility." But why? We've received complaints about you spending too much time in patients' rooms. That's not part of your duties. Sarah knew exactly who had complained. Mrs. Henderson, please. I've worked here for 5 years. My record is perfect. This isn't a discussion. You start downtown tomorrow night. Walking back to the locker room, Sarah fought tears. Downtown was an hour away by bus. She'd never be able to help protect Ethan there. Nancy found her packing her cleaning supplies. I heard, the nurse said. Alexander's behind this. He must have found out about you helping Ethan. Sarah nodded. What am I going to do if I'm not here? We'll figure something out. Jake and Maria are still gathering evidence, but they both knew it wasn't the same. Sarah had been Ethan's constant guardian, the one person who noticed every small change in his condition. That night, Sarah went to Ethan's room one last time. I have to go, she said, taking his hand. But Jake and Nancy will watch over you. And I'll find a way back, I promise. His fingers twitched, squeezing her hand. Weakly. A tear rolled down his cheek. Don't cry, she whispered, wiping it away. You need to focus on waking up. That's the most important thing. At Thompson Technologies, Alexander sat in his office, satisfied. His private investigator had confirmed Sarah's transfer. One problem solved, he told Michael Davis over the phone. Now we can move forward with transferring Ethan to the private clinic. Good, Davis replied. The sooner the better. The board is getting restless about the merger. Neither man knew that Maria was listening through the office intercom system she still controlled. She immediately texted Jake. Jake was at his auto shop when he got Maria's message. He slammed his wrench down and called Nancy. They're moving. Forward with the transfer, he said. Without Sarah there. I know, Nancy cut in, but I have an idea. Remember my cousin Pete? He works maintenance at Downtown Hospital. Yeah? What if we got him to switch shifts with Sarah? Bring her back to St. Luke's under a different department. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Jake hung up and drove to find Sarah. She was in her tiny apartment crying over a photo she'd secretly taken of Ethan. In it, sunlight streamed through his window, making him look almost peaceful. When Jake explained Nancy's plan, Sarah felt hope. A return. But it might take a few days to arrange, Jake warned. Can you handle downtown until then? Sarah nodded. I'll do whatever it takes. The next night, Sarah's first shift downtown was exactly what she'd feared. The facility was older, dirtier, and understaffed. As she mopped endless hallways, her mind kept returning to Ethan. Meanwhile, at St. Luke's, Alexander visited his brother with a team of doctors from the private clinic. His condition is stable enough for transfer, one doctor said, reading charts. That had been carefully edited to hide Ethan's recent signs of improvement. Nancy watched from the doorway, pretending to check supplies. The doctors were lying. She'd seen Ethan's real charts. That night she called Sarah. "They're planning to move him next Monday," she said. "The paperwork's already started." Sarah clutched her phone. "But that's 5 days away. Pete can't switch. With me until next weekend. I'll try to delay things, create some paperwork issues, but Sarah, there's more." Nancy's voice shook as she continued. "I overheard Alexander talking to one of the clinic doctors. They plan to keep Ethan heavily sedated. They're going to make sure he never wakes up." Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. They weren't just stealing Ethan's company. They were planning to keep him in a permanent coma. She couldn't wait for Pete's shift switch. She had to do something now. The next morning, instead of going home after her shift, Sarah took the bus to Thompson Technologies. The building was huge, all glass and steel. She felt small in her cleaning uniform, but she wasn't there to clean. She was there to see Maria. Security stopped her in the lobby. "Miss, this is a private building. Please, I need to see Maria Rodriguez. It's about Ethan Thompson." The guard reached for his phone, but a voice behind them said, "It's okay, Frank. She's with me." Maria stood there in a professional suit, looking nothing like the photos Jake had shown Sarah. She led Sarah to a small conference room. "Jake told me you might come," Maria said. "I have something to show you." She pulled out her phone and played a video. It showed Alexander in his office speaking to Michael Davis. "Once Ethan's in the clinic, make sure Dr. Roberts knows what to do," Alexander was saying. "I don't care what it costs. My brother can't wake up until after the merger." "And if he dies from complications?" Davis asked. Alexander shrugged. "Then I inherit everything anyway." Sarah felt sick. "We have to show this to the police." "It's not enough," Maria said. "They're careful with their words. We need more." "We don't have time. They're moving him on Monday." Maria thought for a moment. "There might be a way, but it's risky, and you'll probably lose your job." "I don't care about my job, tell me." Meanwhile, at St. Luke's, Ethan was having his most active day yet. His brain scans showed increased activity. His fingers moved more frequently. Nancy documented everything, hiding the real charts and replacing them with fake ones showing no change. But she knew they couldn't keep up the deception much longer. That afternoon, Olivia made one of her rare visits. She wasn't alone. "This is Carlo," she told the unconscious Ethan. "My tennis instructor. And, well, we're in love. I know you'd want me to be happy." She placed her engagement ring on the bedside table. "I'll tell the press it was a mutual decision, that we grew apart during your coma. No hard feelings." After she left, Nancy went in to check on Ethan. His heart rate was elevated. "You heard all that, didn't you?" she asked softly. "Good. Use that anger. Fight harder." Back at Thompson Technologies, Maria outlined her plan to Sarah. "Alexander keeps his private files in a safe in his office," she explained. "I know the combination. I've seen him use it. The merger documents are in there, along with letters to the clinic doctors." "How does that help us?" "Tomorrow night is the company's annual charity gala. Everyone will be at the hotel downtown. The office will be empty except for security," Sarah caught on. "And if I'm wearing a cleaning uniform, security won't look twice. I can get you in. But if you're caught, I won't be," Sarah said firmly. "This is our only chance to save Ethan." That night, as she cleaned the endless halls of downtown hospital, Sarah thought about everything that could go wrong. She could be arrested. She'd definitely lose her job. But then she remembered the tear on Ethan's cheek, the way his fingers squeezed hers, the plans to keep him in a permanent coma. Some risks were worth taking. In his hospital bed, Ethan caught fragments of conversations around him. Olivia's betrayal, Alexander's plots. But most of all, he noticed Sarah's absence. The nights were silent now. No one read to him. No one talked to him about their day. He fought harder against the darkness holding him down. He had to wake up, had to stop them, had to find out why his heart beat faster whenever he heard Sarah's voice. The night of the charity gala arrived. Sarah stood in front of her mirror, hands shaking as she pinned her name tag to her cleaning uniform. The tag read, Anna Martinez, a fake ID Maria had created using the credentials of a retired employee. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "Are you sure about this?" She typed back, "No choice, 3 days until they move him." Across town, the Thompson Technologies charity gala was in full swing. Alexander worked the crowd, charming potential investors. Olivia was there too, draped in diamonds, her tennis instructor turned boyfriend nowhere in sight. "The merger with Davis Industries will create thousands of jobs," Alexander announced to applauding guests. "My brother would be proud." In the crowd, Maria forced herself to smile. She wore an elegant black dress, playing her part as the dutiful assistant. Her phone buzzed. Sarah had arrived at the office building. Sarah showed her fake ID to the security guard. Her heart pounded as he examined. "Sir, 10th floor needs cleaning," he said, barely looking at her. "Bathrooms and break room?" "Yes, sir." Sarah pushed her cart toward the elevator, trying to walk normally. The office floors were dark and empty. Following Maria's instructions, Sarah made her way to Alexander's corner office. The security cameras would show her cleaning the nearby bathrooms, exactly what a janitor should be doing. Her hands trembled as she entered the code Maria had given her into the safe hidden behind a painting. The door swung open. Inside, she found exactly what they needed. Letters to the private clinic discussing permanent sedation protocols, merger documents showing how Alexander and Davis planned to strip Thompson Technologies for parts, proof that they'd been selling company assets at fraction of their worth through shell companies. Sarah pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of everything. Each document was more damning than the last. Suddenly, she heard voices in the hallway. "Just need to grab something from my office," Alexander was saying. Sarah's heart stopped. She quickly closed the safe, replaced the painting, and dove behind a large potted plant with her cleaning cart. Alexander walked in with Michael Davis. Sarah barely dared to breathe. "Once your brother's in the clinic, how long before we announce the merger?" Davis asked. "A week, maybe 2. Long enough for the doctors to certify he's permanently incapacitated." Alexander laughed. "Poor Ethan, such a tragedy." "And the board?" "Won't be a problem. I've replaced most of them. The rest are too scared to ask questions." They left, still talking. Sarah waited 5 minutes before slipping out. Her hands shook so badly she could barely text Maria. "Got everything. Getting out now." But as she pushed her cart toward the elevator, a security guard she hadn't seen before stopped her. "ID," he demanded. Sarah showed him the fake badge, praying he wouldn't look too closely. He frowned. "Wait here." He walked to his desk and picked up the phone. Sarah knew she had seconds before he discovered the truth. Making a split-second decision, she abandoned her cart and ran for the stairs. Behind her, she heard shouting. 10 flights of stairs later, she burst out of an emergency exit into an alley. Her lungs burned. She could hear guards behind her. A car screeched to a stop at the alley entrance. Jake was behind the wheel. "Get in!" Sarah dove into the passenger seat. They sped away just as guards emerged from the building. "Did you get it?" Jake asked. Sarah nodded, too out of breath to speak. She'd gotten everything, but now they'd know someone had seen their plans. At the hospital, Nancy was checking Ethan's vital signs when she noticed something different. His brain activity was stronger than ever. "Come on, Ethan," she whispered. "Wake up. Sarah's risking everything for you." In the darkness of his coma, Ethan fought harder. He could feel himself getting closer to consciousness, but something kept pulling him back, like weights on his mind. Jake drove Sarah to his auto shop. Maria was waiting there with her laptop. "Let me see what you got," she said. Sarah's hands shook as she sent the photos from her phone. Maria's eyes widened as she looked through them. "This is it. This is everything we need. The merger documents, the clinic instructions, the proof of asset stripping." She looked up. "Sarah, you did it." But their victory was short-lived. Sarah's phone rang. It was Nancy. "They're moving up the transfer," Nancy said, her voice shaking. "Alexander just called. They're coming for Ethan tomorrow morning." Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. "But we need more time." "There's more," Nancy continued. "Alexander knows someone broke into his office. They're reviewing security footage now. It won't take long to identify you." Jake cursed. Maria started typing frantically on her laptop. "We need to get these documents to the board members," Maria said, "and the police, but it will take time to verify everything." "We don't have time," Sarah said. "They're moving him tomorrow." She thought for a moment, then made a decision. Jake, I need you to take me to the hospital. What? Sarah, they'll arrest you if they find you there. I don't care. I need to see him one more time. I need to try. At the gala, Alexander received a call that made his face darken. He pulled Davis aside. Someone broke into my office. Accessed the safe. Davis's expression hardened. Take care of it tonight. Already on it. I'm moving Ethan to the clinic first thing tomorrow. And I've called the police about a break-in. They'll be looking for our little cleaning lady. Sarah knew she was probably walking into a trap, but she had to try. Jake parked a block from the hospital. I'll create a distraction at the front desk, he said. You go through the service entrance. Sarah hugged him. Thank you for everything. She slipped into the hospital through the employee entrance, using her old key card. They hadn't deactivated it yet. The night shift was quiet. Nancy met her on Ethan's floor. Security's been increased. You have maybe 5 minutes. Sarah rushed to Ethan's room. In the dim light, he looked different. More color in his face. His fingers twitched constantly now. Ethan, she said, taking his hand, I know you can hear me. I know you're fighting, but you have to fight harder. They're coming for you tomorrow. His fingers squeezed hers weakly. I got proof of everything they did, but it won't matter if they get you to that clinic. Tears fell on their joined hands. Please, please wake up. I can't lose you. In the darkness of his coma, Ethan heard her voice, felt her tears. The weights on his mind seemed lighter somehow. He fought against the darkness with everything he had, and somewhere in the hospital, an alarm began to sound. The alarm blared through the hospital corridors. Sarah's heart raced as she looked at the monitors surrounding Ethan's bed. His vital signs were spiking. Nancy burst into the room. Security's coming. You need to hide. But Sarah couldn't move. Ethan's hand was gripping hers tightly now, much tighter than before. His eyelids flickered. He's waking up, she whispered. Now, of all times? Nancy checked his vital signs. Sarah, you have to go. If they find you here. The sound of running footsteps echoed in the hallway. Sarah dove into the bathroom just as doctors rushed in. Through the crack in the door, she watched as they surrounded Ethan's bed. His body was moving, fighting against the tubes and wires. BP's elevated, one doctor said. Brain activity off the charts. Call his brother, another ordered. He needs to be here. Sarah's phone vibrated, a text from Jake. Police are here. Are looking for you, get out now. But she couldn't leave. Not when Ethan was so close to waking up. In the darkness of his mind, Ethan could hear the chaos around him. But one thing anchored him, the lingering warmth of Sarah's hand in his. He fought harder against the fog holding him down. Alexander was still at the charity gala when he got the call. His face went pale. What do you mean he's waking up? He hissed into the phone. That's impossible. He grabbed his coat and rushed out, leaving confused guests behind. In his car, he called the private clinic. Get your team there now, he ordered. I don't care what you have to do. Sedate him before he fully wakes up. Maria, still at the gala, overheard everything. She immediately called Jake. They're sending doctors from the clinic, she warned, to keep him under. Jake, hiding in the hospital parking lot, saw a black van pull up. Men in white coats rushed inside. Sarah, he texted, clinic doctors just arrived. Stop them. In Ethan's room, the regular hospital staff worked to stabilize him. His movements were stronger now, more purposeful. Sarah watched in horror as the clinic doctors entered. We'll take it from here, one announced, pulling out a syringe. Wait, the hospital doctor protested. We need proper authorization. Here. It is. The clinic doctor produced papers, the transfer documents Alexander had prepared. He's our patient now. Sarah couldn't let this happen. Not when Ethan was so close. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the bathroom. Those documents are fake, she announced. Everyone turned to stare at her. The clinic doctor's eyes narrowed. Who are you? Security? I have proof, Sarah continued, her voice stronger than she felt. Proof that Alexander Thompson and these doctors are conspiring to keep Ethan in a coma, to steal his company. She pulled out her phone, showing the photos she'd taken from Alexander's safe. That's private property, the clinic doctor sputtered. I stole those documents because they prove you're planning to murder him, Sarah shot back. Keep him sedated until he dies from complications. The hospital staff looked shocked. Nancy stepped forward. I've seen their plans too, she said. They were going to transfer him to a private clinic and keep him permanently sedated. Security. Guards arrived, but now the hospital doctor held up his hand. No one is moving this patient, he declared. Not until we verify these allegations. The clinic doctors protested, but hospital security stood firm. And then everyone fell silent as a weak voice spoke. Sarah? She turned to the bed. Ethan's eyes were open, blinking in the harsh hospital lights. I'm here, she whispered, moving to his side. His hand found hers. I heard you. All this time, I heard you. The hospital erupted into chaos. Doctors rushed to check Ethan's vitals. The clinic team tried to retreat, but security stopped them. And then Alexander burst in. Get away from my brother, he demanded, pointing at Sarah. But Ethan's grip on her hand tightened. No, he said, his voice weak but clear. She stays. Alexander's face contorted with rage. You don't understand. She broke into my office, stole private documents. She's trying to ruin our company. Your company. Ethan's voice grew stronger. You mean the company you've been selling off piece by piece? Alexander froze. You were unconscious. I heard everything. Every meeting in this room. Every plan you made with Davis. Ethan's eyes were clear now, focused on his brother. Every betrayal. Police officers appeared in the doorway. They'd been called for Sarah, but now they heard something very different. Officers, Ethan said, arrest my brother for conspiracy and corporate fraud. You can't prove anything, Alexander sneered. Sarah held up her phone. Actually, we can. Every document, every conversation. It's all here. As the police led Alexander away, he shouted threats and accusations, but no one was listening. The hospital doctor turned to Ethan. Mr. Thompson, you've been in a coma for nearly 2 months. You need rest. In a minute. Ethan looked at Sarah. First, I need to thank the woman who saved my life, the one who talked to me every night, who never gave up. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. I just did what anyone would do. No, he said softly. You did what only you would do. Exhausted but finally awake, Ethan kept hold of Sarah's hand as doctors examined him. He had months of recovery ahead. His company was in chaos. His fiancée had betrayed him, but somehow none of that seemed to matter as much as the feeling of Sarah's hand in his. Outside the hospital, reporters gathered as word spread of Ethan Thompson's miraculous awakening. Inside, Maria and Jake arrived, bringing more evidence of Alexander's crimes. The board is meeting tomorrow, Maria reported. They're ready to hear everything. Nancy shooed everyone out. He needs rest. The drama can wait until morning. As the room cleared, Ethan tugged Sarah's hand. Stay, just for a while? She smiled. Of course, I'll read to you. No need anymore, he said. Just talk to me, like you did every night. And so she did as the night settled around them. But this time, he could answer back. In his holding cell, Alexander seethed with rage, but his power was broken. The evidence was overwhelming. And in room 507, where it had all began, a cleaning lady and a billionaire talked through the night, neither quite believing how their lives had changed. The world would have questions. There would be trials and headlines and scandal, but for now in the quiet hospital room none of that mattered. All that mattered was that Ethan was awake, and Sarah was exactly where she belonged. Morning sunlight streamed through the hospital windows as Sarah helped Ethan sit up in bed. His muscles were weak from 2 months of disuse, but his mind was sharp as ever. The board meeting starts in an hour, Maria said, setting up a laptop. They're waiting to hear from you. Ethan nodded, then winced at the movement. First, I need to know everything, from the beginning. Jake and Maria spent the next half hour explaining how Alexander had systematically dismantled parts of Thompson Technologies, selling assets to Davis Industries through shell companies. Sarah filled in what she'd learned during her nights in the hospital. And Olivia? Ethan asked quietly. Sarah hesitated. She's been seeing someone else, a tennis instructor. She left her ring here last week. To everyone's surprise, Ethan smiled. Good. Saves me the trouble of ending it myself. He looked at Sarah. I heard her visits, you know. All show, no substance, unlike someone else who sat with me every night. Sarah blushed and busied herself adjusting his pillows. The laptop chimed. The board meeting was starting. On screen, nervous faces appeared in a video conference grid. "Gentlemen," Ethan said, his voice stronger than it had been, "we have a lot to discuss." For the next hour, he laid out everything: Alexander's betrayal, the fraudulent asset sales, the conspiracy with Davis. Maria shared documents proving every accusation. "The police have already frozen the suspicious accounts," Jake added. "And Davis was arrested this morning." The board members looked shell-shocked. One spoke up. "Mr. Thompson, what do you want us to do?" "Start reversing everything Alexander did. Cancel the merger. Recall any assets not yet transferred and—" He paused, looking at Sarah. "Hire Ms. Miller as my personal assistant." Sarah's head snapped up. "What? But I'm just... The woman who saved my company and my life," Ethan finished. "I think you're qualified." After the meeting, news crews descended on the hospital. Everyone wanted the story of the billionaire who woke from his coma to stop a corporate takeover. And what about the cleaning lady who exposed it all, reporters asked. Sarah tried to hide from the cameras, but Ethan insisted on telling everyone how she had saved him. "Sometimes," he told one reporter, "angels come disguised as cleaning ladies." But not everyone was celebrating. In jail, Alexander received visitors, lawyers hired by old business associates who wanted to make sure he didn't talk too much to the police. "Just keep your mouth shut," one lawyer advised. "We'll get you out of this." Alexander wasn't listening. His rage consumed him. Everything he'd worked for was gone because of a cleaning lady. Olivia tried damage control, giving tearful interviews about how she'd been deceived by Alexander, how she'd never known about his plans. "I still care deeply for Ethan," she told reporters, dabbing at dry eyes. "I just hope he can forgive me." But Ethan had more important things to worry about. Physical therapy was exhausting, and rebuilding his company would take months. Sarah stayed, with him through it all. She resigned from the cleaning staff, though Mrs. Henderson had already figured out she wouldn't be coming back, and moved into her new role as Ethan's assistant. "You don't have to do this," she told him one evening as she helped him walk the hospital corridor. "Give me a job, I mean. I didn't help you to get anything in return." Ethan stopped, leaning on his walker. "I know. That's exactly why I trust you." He looked at her intently. "You helped me when I had nothing to give, when I was just a body in a bed." "You were never just a body in a bed," Sarah said softly. "I talked to you every night because I saw who you really were." "And who was that?" "Someone worth fighting for." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. But before either could speak, Nancy appeared. "Time for your medication, Mr. Thompson." The moment passed, but something had changed. They both felt it. Days turned into weeks. Ethan grew stronger, moving from walker to cane. Sarah organized his business meetings from the hospital room, keeping his company running while he recovered. Jake took over security again, implementing new systems to prevent another takeover attempt. Maria returned to her role as office manager, but with a promotion and a raise. One morning, Dr. Phillips came in with good news. "You're ready to go home." "Mr. Thompson," Ethan looked at Sarah, "will you help me? The mansion will feel pretty empty." "Of course," she said. "It's my job now." "No," he said quietly. "I'm not asking my assistant. I'm asking you, Sarah." She understood. "Yes, I'll help you." As they prepared for his discharge, news came from the district attorney. Alexander had agreed to a plea deal, admitting to everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. 10 years, Jake reported, and he has to repay everything he stole. "What about Davis?" Ethan asked, fighting the charges. But with Alexander's confession and the evidence Sarah found, he doesn't stand a chance. That night, their last in the hospital, Sarah helped Ethan pack. The room that had been their world for so long looked strange empty. "Hard to believe it's over," she said. "No," Ethan replied. "It's just beginning." He reached for her hand, the same hand that had held his through the darkness. This time, when their eyes met, no one interrupted. "Sarah," he said softly, "when I was in the coma, your voice was my anchor. Your stories gave me hope. Your touch reminded me I wasn't alone." "I just did what felt right," she whispered. You did more than that. You showed me what real love looks like. He squeezed her hand. Not the society parties and photo ops Olivia wanted, but sitting with someone through their darkest hours, fighting for them when everyone else has given up. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. Ethan, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know this is fast, complicated. I have a lot of healing to do, a company to rebuild. But I want you to know, whatever happens next, whatever role you choose to play in my life, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of what you did for me. Sarah looked at their joined hands. You already are. Outside the hospital, reporters waited to capture Ethan Thompson's triumphant departure the next day. They expected a story about a billionaire's revenge, about corporate intrigue and betrayal. But the real story was much simpler. It was about a woman who saw value in a man when he had nothing, and a man who woke up to find that his true fortune had nothing to do with money at all. The Thompson mansion looked exactly as it had the day of the accident. White roses still bloomed in the garden where the wedding was supposed to have taken place, but everything else had changed. Sarah helped Ethan from the car, supporting him as he made his way up the front steps. Catherine, the head maid, rushed to open the door. Welcome home, Mr. Thompson. Her eyes darted curiously between Ethan and Sarah. Inside, the grand foyer felt cold and empty. Ethan leaned heavily on his cane, looking around like a stranger in his own home. The East Wing bedroom has been prepared, Catherine said. It's closer to the ground floor, easier for your recovery. Thank you. Ethan turned to Sarah. Will you help me get settled? Catherine's eyebrows rose, but she said nothing. The staff had been buzzing with gossip about the cleaning lady who had saved their boss. The East Wing bedroom was massive, with large windows overlooking the garden. Sarah helped Ethan to a comfortable chair while she unpacked his things. This closet is bigger than my whole apartment, she muttered. Ethan laughed, then winced. His ribs were still sore. Sarah, I've been thinking. You should move into the guest house, she stopped unpacking. What? It's a 10-minute drive from your apartment. As my assistant, you'll need to be here early anyway, and during my recovery. People will talk, she said softly. They already are. He met her eyes. Let them. Before she could respond, Jake arrived with security updates. We've replaced all the locks and security codes, he reported, and I've hired additional guards. No one gets in without clearance. Good. Ethan shifted in his chair. What about the office? Maria's handling things. The board approved your emergency measures. We're already recovering some of the assets Alexander sold. Sarah listened while organizing Ethan's medication schedule. Her phone buzzed. Another reporter wanting an interview. They're offering a lot of money, she told Ethan after Jake left. For my story. And? I told them no. Some things are private. He reached for her hand. Thank you. The next few days fell into a routine. Sarah arrived early each morning to help Ethan with his exercises. Physical therapy was grueling, but he never complained. You're stronger than yesterday, she encouraged him during their walks in the garden. Thanks to you. He paused to rest on a stone bench. Sarah, there's something I need to ask you. Her heart skipped. Yes. Will you go to the charity gala with me next week? She stared at him. The gala? But that's where all your society friends will be. Exactly. I want them to meet the woman who saved me. He squeezed her hand. Unless you'd rather not. No, I mean yes, I'll go. She laughed nervously. But I don't have anything to wear to something like that. Leave that to me. The next day, a famous designer arrived at the mansion with racks of gowns. Sarah protested, but Ethan insisted. Consider it a work expense, he said with a wink. She chose a simple dark blue gown that made her eyes sparkle. When she tried it on, Ethan's expression made her blush. Perfect, was all he said. Meanwhile, the business world was still in upheaval. Davis Industries' stock plummeted as more evidence of fraud emerged. Michael Davis faced multiple criminal charges. Olivia attempted to visit the mansion, but security turned her away. But I'm his fiancée, she protested. Ex-fiancé, Jake corrected her. Mr. Thompson's orders. She left in tears, but they were as fake as everything else about her. The night of the gala arrived. Sarah stood in front of her mirror in the guest house. She had taken Ethan up on his offer to stay there, hardly recognizing herself. The blue gown fit perfectly. Her usually simple hair was styled elegantly. Diamond earrings, borrowed from the family vault, sparkled. At her ears, a knock at the door. Ethan stood there in a tuxedo, looking more handsome than ever. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she admitted. "These people, they're not my world. They're not mine either. Not anymore." He offered his arm. "My world is wherever you are." The gala was held at the city's finest hotel. Reporters lined the red carpet. Flashbulbs exploded as Ethan Thompson arrived, not with a socialite on his arm, but with the former cleaning lady who had saved his life. Inside, the whispers and stares followed them. Sarah heard snippets of conversation. Can you believe he brought her? Gold digger, obviously. What happened to Olivia? Ethan kept her close, proudly introducing her to everyone. This is Sarah Miller. She's the reason I'm alive. Some people were genuinely warm. Others barely concealed their disdain. Sarah held her head high through it all. During dinner, Ethan clinked his glass for attention. The room fell silent as he stood, somewhat unsteadily. 2 months ago, I lay in a hospital bed, betrayed by those closest to me. My brother tried to steal my company. My fiancée abandoned me. His eyes found Sarah. But one person believed in me. A cleaning lady who saw value in a man who had nothing but his name. The room was completely silent now. She risked everything to save me. Not for money or fame, but because it was right. He raised his glass. So tonight, I want to thank Sarah Miller for teaching me that true worth isn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to stand up for what you believe in. Applause filled the room, genuine this time. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. Later, as they danced slowly due to Ethan's still recovering. "Strength," he whispered. "Was it terrible?" "No," she said, "but it's not my world. Then we'll make our own world." The music played on. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, remembering all the nights she'd sat beside his hospital bed, dreaming of moments like this. In the corner, Maria and Jake watched them dance. "About time," Maria said softly. "Think she'll say yes?" Jake asked. 2. "What?" He nodded toward Ethan's jacket pocket where a small box made a telling bulge. "Eventually," Maria smiled, "when they're ready." The night wound down. As they drove home, Sarah kicked off her uncomfortable shoes. "Thank you," Ethan said suddenly. "For what?" "For being you. For not changing even when my world tried to change you." She took his hand. "I like who I am. The woman who reads books too. Coma patients and fights corporate raiders in her cleaning uniform. I like who you are too," he said softly. "Very much." They pulled up to the mansion. The gardens were lit with soft lights, making it look like a fairy tale. Sarah helped Ethan from the car, but he didn't let go of her hand. "Stay with me tonight?" he asked. "Just to talk, like we used to in the hospital." She smiled. "Of course." And so they sat in the garden talking until dawn, two people from different worlds who had found something rare and precious, a love built not on wealth or status, but on the simple act of believing in someone when the rest of the world had given up. The trial of Alexander Thompson began on a cool autumn morning. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters as Ethan and Sarah arrived. "Mr. Thompson, will you testify against your brother?" "Miss Miller, how does it feel to be dating your former patient?" "Our wedding bells in the future." Sarah kept her head down, but Ethan squeezed her hand reassuringly. After 3 months together, they'd learned to ignore the constant media attention. Inside the courtroom, Alexander sat with his lawyers, looking thinner and paler than before. When he saw Ethan and Sarah enter, his face twisted with hatred. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically. Document after document showed how Alexander had systematically stripped Thompson Technologies of its assets, selling them to Davis Industries through shell companies. Sarah testified about the night she broke into Alexander's office, about finding the incriminating documents. Some jurors wiped away tears as she described her nightly vigils at Ethan's bedside. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "The way they talked about him, like he was already gone. They weren't waiting for him to wake up, they were waiting for him to die." When it was Alexander's turn to testify, he tried to paint himself as the victim. "I was protecting the company," he claimed. "Ethan was in a coma. Someone had to take control. By selling off assets at a fraction of their value, the prosecutor asked. Those were legitimate business decisions, and the instructions to the private clinic to keep your brother permanently sedated. Alexander's facade cracked. He didn't deserve that company. Dad always favored him, gave him everything. I was the oldest. His outburst shocked the courtroom. Even his lawyers couldn't control him as years of jealousy and resentment poured out. During a break, Ethan found Sarah in the hallway. "Are you okay?" she asked, seeing his pale face. "I just keep thinking, if you hadn't been there," he pulled her close, "I would have lost everything." "You didn't," she reminded him. "You're here, the company's recovering, and I have you," he finished. Back at the mansion that evening, Sarah helped Ethan with his physical therapy exercises. He was much stronger now, walking without a cane most days. "The doctor says I can start swimming next week," he said between stretches. "That's wonderful." She helped him up. "Soon you won't need me anymore." His expression turned serious. "Sarah, Miller, I will always need you." Before she could respond, Maria arrived with urgent news. "Davis is offering a plea deal," she announced. "He'll testify against Alexander in exchange for a lighter sentence." "What does the prosecutor think?" Ethan asked. "She says his testimony could put Alexander away for 20 years instead of 10. Sarah watched Ethan struggle with the decision. Despite everything, Alexander was still his brother. "Do what you think is right," she said softly. He nodded. "Tell them we accept the deal." That night they sat in the garden, their favorite spot now. The roses were fading with the season, but the air was still warm. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, "about the future." Sarah's heart skipped. They hadn't talked much about their relationship, taking things slowly, letting it develop naturally. "The company's stable again," he continued. "The trial will be over soon. And he took her hand. "I want to start fresh, build something new." "What do you mean?" "I'm stepping down as CEO." She stared at him. "What? But you fought so hard to save the company, and now it's safe. Jake and Maria can run things. I want to create something different, something that helps people." Understanding dawned. "The hospital foundation?" He nodded. "A charity to help patients who can't afford care, to support hospital staff who go above and beyond." He smiled. "Inspired by a certain cleaning lady who changed my life." Tears filled her eyes. "Ethan, I want you to run it with me, not as my assistant, but as my partner, in everything." The meaning behind his words was clear. Sarah felt her heart race. "Are you sure? Your world?" "Our world," he corrected. "If you want it to be," she answered him with a kiss. The next day, Alexander's trial continued. But something had changed in Ethan. The weight of revenge had lifted, replaced by hope for the future. When Davis testified, laying bare every detail of their conspiracy, Ethan held Sarah's hand and felt only pity for his brother. During the lunch break, reporters cornered them again. "Mr. Thompson, what are your plans after the trial?" "Miss Miller, how does it feel to go from cleaning lady to charity director?" Ethan surprised everyone by stopping. "I'll tell you my plans," he said clearly. "I plan to marry this woman if she'll have me. I plan to use my second chance at life to help others get their second chances. And I plan to spend every day grateful for the twist of fate that brought a cleaning lady with a heart of gold into my hospital room." The reporters erupted with questions, but Ethan and Sarah were already walking away. "That wasn't exactly the proposal I had planned," he whispered. She laughed. "Since when has anything about us been traditional?" Back in the courtroom, the testimony continued, but Sarah barely heard it. Her mind was on the future, not the one she'd imagined as a cleaning lady, or even the one she'd dreamed of while reading to an unconscious billionaire. No, this future was better, because it was real and they would build it together. That evening, the jury began their deliberations. Sarah found Ethan in his study, looking at old family photos. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. "About Alexander?" "No." "About us?" He pulled her into his arms. "Never. Even though I don't know which fork to use at fancy dinners, I love that about you." He kissed her forehead. "I love everything about you." "I love you too," she said softly. It was the first time either had said the words. Outside, the garden lights came on automatically, illuminating the spot where a wedding had almost taken place months ago. Soon another wedding would happen there, but this time it would be real, built on love, trust, and the kind of courage that makes a cleaning lady risk everything to save a man she barely knew. In his jail cell, Alexander waited for the verdict. In her penthouse, Olivia planned her next social conquest. In his office, Michael Davis prepared for his own trial, but in the Thompson mansion, none of that mattered. What mattered was the future being built by two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, and proved that sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with a fairy tale. They start with a cleaning cart and a heart brave enough to fight for what's right. 1 year later, the Thompson mansion gardens bloomed with white roses again. But this time, the wedding would actually take place. Sarah stood in front of a mirror in the East Wing bedroom, now her bedroom too, hardly recognizing herself in the simple but elegant white dress. No designer labels, no excessive frills. Just like her, it was authentic and real. Nancy, who had become one of her closest friends, adjusted the veil. "Hard to believe a year ago you were mopping hospital floors," she said. "Sometimes I still can't believe it myself." Sarah touched the sapphire pendant at her throat, a gift from Ethan. "Do you think I'm ready for this? To be Mrs. Thompson?" "Honey, you were ready the moment you stood up to Alexander to save Ethan. The trial seemed like a lifetime ago." Alexander had been sentenced to 15 years for fraud and conspiracy. Michael Davis got 8 years. The corporate world had been shocked, but justice had prevailed. Thompson Technologies was thriving under Jake and Maria's management, but its biggest success was the new Thompson Foundation for Patient Care, which had already helped hundreds of families afford medical treatment. A knock at the door. Catherine, the head maid who had become one of Sarah's strongest supporters, peeked in. "The guests are arriving," she announced, "and Mr. Thompson is pacing like a nervous teenager." Sarah smiled. Some things never changed. In his study, Ethan adjusted his tie for the 10th time. Jake watched with amusement. "Relax," his best man advised. "She already said yes, several times." "I know," Ethan smiled. "I just still can't believe how lucky I am." The garden was transformed, but not with the ostentatious decorations Olivia had once planned. Simple white flowers, twinkling lights, and comfortable chairs for the smaller, more intimate guest list. Hospital staff sat in the front rows, nurses, doctors, even the cafeteria workers who had always given Sarah extra coffee during her night shifts. They were as much family as any society friends. Sarah's mother dabbed at her eyes in the front row. Her life had changed too. Ethan had insisted on buying her a comfortable house near the mansion. "You gave me the greatest gift," he'd told her, "a daughter who taught me what love really means." The ceremony began. Sarah walked down the aisle alone. Her choice. She'd walked alone all her life, until finding Ethan. This last solo walk felt right. Ethan's face lit up when he saw her. He still looked at her that way, like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe in. Their vows were simple, honest, like their love. "I promise to read to you every night," Sarah said, making their guests laugh. They all knew the story. "I promise to thank God every day for sending an angel disguised as a cleaning lady," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. As they exchanged rings, Sarah caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Olivia had come, despite everything. But she wasn't there to cause trouble. Her eyes held something like understanding, maybe even a touch of envy for a love so real. The reception was full of joy and laughter. Hospital staff danced with society figures, all social barriers forgotten. Love, they had learned, knew no class distinctions. Maria caught the bouquet, making Jake blush furiously. They'd been dating for 6 months. Another happy consequence of everything that had happened. As the evening went on, Ethan and Sarah slipped away to their special spot in the garden. "Happy?" he asked, holding her close. "More than I ever dreamed possible." She touched his face. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find myself back in the hospital, just a cleaning lady with a hopeless crush." "So you were never just a cleaning lady," he said firmly. You were the woman who saved my life, my company, and my soul." They danced slowly under the stars, remembering everything that had brought them to this moment. In his prison cell, Alexander watched the society news coverage of the wedding. Something in his hardened heart softened, just a little, seeing his brother's genuine happiness. The next day, a large donation was made to the Thompson Foundation from an anonymous source. The lawyers wouldn't say, but Sarah knew. Some part of the brother Ethan had once loved still existed. Months passed. The Thompson Foundation grew, helping more people every day. Sarah ran it with the same dedication she'd once shown with her cleaning cart, never forgetting where she came from. On their first anniversary, Ethan brought her back to room 507 at St. T. Luke's. They'd converted it into a special care room for long-term patients, ensuring they'd never be alone. "This is where our story began," he said, holding her close. Sarah looked around the room, remembering those long nights of reading, hoping, believing. "No," she corrected him. "This is where our story really started. Everything before was just preparation." They'd kept the old armchair where she used to sit and read. Now other volunteers used it, reading to patients, offering the same comfort Sarah had once given. That night back at the mansion, Ethan had a surprise for her. "Close your eyes," he said, leading her to his study. When she opened them, she gasped. The wall held a beautiful painting of a cleaning cart beside a hospital bed, with the words, "Love begins with believing" underneath. "To remind us," Ethan said softly, "that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages." Sarah touched the painting, tears in her eyes. "We should hang it in the foundation office to inspire others." "Always thinking of others," he smiled. "That's why I fell in love with you. Life wasn't perfect. They had their challenges, their disagreements. Sarah sometimes still felt out of place at high society events. Ethan sometimes pushed himself too hard, forgetting he wasn't invincible. But they faced everything together, stronger for the trials they'd overcome. And every night, without fail, Sarah still read to Ethan. Not because he needed it anymore, but because it reminded them both of the miracle they'd found. A miracle that proved true love doesn't care about status or wealth. It cares about the heart that believes when others doubt, the courage that fights when others flee, and the simple truth that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't written in the stars. They're written in hospital rooms by cleaning ladies with hearts of gold. The end.